It's time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you've missed any of the previous readings, look in the description below for a playlist, and this will be our last reading. We'll finish the book today. When I walked to the end of the ridge, I walked down a steep path that zigzagged back and forth down into the valley of rising mist. I hurried down Academy Branch and down the back road west of Lansboro. This way, I didn't meet too many people. On this evening, I had never met a person, not even when I walked through a back alley to the railroad tracks. I crossed the railroad tracks and was soon on Main Street, where I hurried to the Norris's residence. I walked up on the porch and rang the doorbell. "You've made it all right," Naomi Dean said. "Never met a person on my way here," I said, as I took the Derringer from my pocket and unfastened the holster and gave her my .38. "How lucky," she said. She took my pistols to put in a safe place so her younger brother wouldn't get a hold of one. Once he did get them, and ran around through the house among the other members of the Norris family, screaming and pulling on the triggers. It was fortunate for everybody in the house the safety was locked on each pistol. This incident did cause some excitement among the members of this quiet-living and highly respected family. "Plenty has happened in the last few days, Naomi Dean," I said. "I've got a lot to tell you." "What is it, Jesse? Come sit down and tell me." "I've come home to stay," I said as I sat down beside her on the divan. "But you'll go back to Dartmouth High School to teach next September, won't you?" she asked. "You'll just be home for the summer." "I will not be back at Dartmouth next September," I answered. "My special work of teaching remedial English is over. No more remedial English in Dartmouth High School. Not any other positions open there. Not that I know of. I just didn't reapply." "But Jesse, what will you do now?" "I'm going to raise sheep." She was stunned when I told her this. "I've bought 300 acres of rough land," I said. "I've bought 200 of the prettiest ewes you ever saw." "How did you do it?" she asked. "I thought you were in debt." "I was just about out of debt," I said, "but I've borrowed $3,800 more." "Oh, Jesse, you've never raised sheep before," she said. "I wonder if you know what you're doing. You can teach school. You've been educated for that profession. But what if you fail raising sheep? Then what?" "You'll have a big debt to pay back, teaching school. It will take you at least 4 years to pay it back. That is," she continued, "if you can get as good pay as you did at Dartmouth High School. We may not make much teaching school, but it sure is pay." "Naomi Dean, why haven't we married before now?" I asked. "It's not because I haven't asked you to marry me. It's not because we don't love each other. How long have we known each other?" Naomi Dean didn't answer. She looked at me but didn't speak. 6 years ago, I asked you to marry me," I said. "That was when I was superintendent of Greenwood County Schools. You know the reason you didn't? 4 years I was principal of the second largest high school in this county. 1 year I was in Europe on a Guggenheim fellowship with my expenses paid, while this past year I did special teaching in one of the best high schools in Ohio. Yet we can't get enough ahead to get married. Isn't it time I try something else?" "Maybe you're right," she said thoughtfully, "but you're taking a big chance when you leave the profession you know." "You said once that we were intelligent people and we had ought to face the facts," I reminded her. "That was on the evening I brought the poems here for you to read. That was 6 years ago. Now I have some facts." Naomi Dean sat in silence watching me as I took an envelope from my inside coat pocket. "In the 9 years I've been employed in my profession," I said, "I've made an approximate total of $10,832. This makes an annual wage of $1,203.55. On a 12 months basis, I have averaged $100.30 a month. Yet," I continued as I turned from the paper to Naomi Dean, "I have an AB degree and I've done approximately 2 years of graduate work. I've spent approximately 6 years of my life preparing myself for my profession. I've been principal of 2 large high schools and superintendent of a large county school system in Kentucky. I've held one of the better paying teaching positions in one of Ohio's highest rating high schools, yet you and I have not been able to get married because we both could not live from my salary. Isn't that the truth? That's the truth, she admitted. Then how intelligent are we? I asked. Teaching is not charitable work. It is a profession. It is the greatest profession under the sun. I don't know of any profession that is more important to the people upon this earth. I've loved it. I still love it. But I'm leaving it because it's left me. I'm going to raise sheep and farm and write a novel. Then, I added in a softer tone of voice, I want to marry you. You're a city girl, but I want you to come soon as you can to see my farm and sheep. When Naomi Dean drove her father's car up Academy Branch the following Saturday morning, I was waiting for her at Benton Campbell's garage. Benton lived where the passable road for an automobile ended. He lived where the North Fork and West Fork of Academy Branch united. Up either North Fork or West Fork of this small valley there was a path that followed the small streams. Naomi Dean finally found a place in this narrow-gauged valley where she could park her car. Then she came from the car with a picnic basket. "Good morning, Jesse," she greeted me with a smile. "Which way do we go from here?" "This way," I said as I took the picnic basket and we walked side by side along the winding path up the North Fork of Academy Branch. For the rugged acres that I had bought extended from midway of W Hollow across a high divide into the headwaters of this valley. "This is wild-looking country," Naomi Dean said as we walked up the sunlit path between the towering hills where multicolored butterflies we disturbed on the warm, water-soaked sand made bright clouds on the morning wind. In 10 minutes more we came to a new sheep fence my father, uncle, and I had built from ridge to ridge across the valley. "Over there is my land," I said. "But how am I going to get across to see it?" Naomi Dean asked as she stood behind the fence looking over. I put the picnic basket down, then I lifted her gently over the fence. I picked up the basket and reached it over to her. Then I climbed over. Here she looked at the stream of cool water that trickled down the little valley on whose steep banks grew tall gray-barked poplars, the ash, beech, oak, and maple. From the soft, loamy soil beneath these trees grew blue and pink ageratum, whippoorwill flowers, mayapple, and blue beggar's lice. "Oh, Jessie," she exclaimed as she saw the clumps of wildflowers growing everywhere. Then she followed a little sheep path to the closest cluster of ageratum. "But we don't have too much time to spend in this valley," I warned her. "Not if we're going to get over this farm. We've got a lot of walking to do." When the slow-moving June wind molested the canopy of trees above us, leaf-sized blotches and pencil-sized stripes of sunlight filtered down to reflect shifting silver on the tumbling mountain water. Naomi Dean stood for a minute and looked at this. Then we slowly walked up a sheep path toward the high hill slope of pasture grass. In one hand I carried the picnic basket. With my other hand I held hers. When we emerged from the wooded valley to the pasture's edge, Naomi Dean saw something it will take her a long time to forget. On the high grassy slope before us, she saw the flock of ewes with little lambs scampering among them. The lambs were playing like little children and crying for their mothers. Above the flock, where the high ridge shouldered to the sky, there was a great cloud of mist, beautiful and white as clean-washed sheep's wool, that had risen from the deep valley where we had just been. This cloud of mist obscured part of the flock. We watched the cloud, sparkling in the morning sun, as it slowly ascended and floated out to space. "Jessie, if you can only pay for all of this," Naomi Dean said. Honestly, this is beautiful. You've not seen it all, I said. You don't have to carry guns here to protect yourself either. Only to protect the sheep, I said. If wild dogs made an attack or if a fox tries to carry away a lamb, that's the only reason I carry my pistols here. Slowly we climbed the high, steep hill. Every few minutes we would stop and look back at the timbered valley below, where the stream of cool mountain water, where the sheep went to drink, was hidden under the tall trees. There was little clouds of mist still rising from the valley below us toward the sun. How can the lambs find their mothers? Naomi Dean asked. For she was puzzled as she watched the lost lambs searching for their mothers. Don't you worry about that, I said. If there were 1,000 ewes in this flock and 1,000 lambs, each lamb would find the right mother. We climbed to the flock and we stood among them. Naomi Dean picked up a lost lamb and held it in her arms while many of the ewes gathered around us. When we reached the divide, we stood for a minute and looked over the part of the farm that lay in the headwaters of Academy Branch. There it was, spread beyond us along the ridges that shouldered to the sky and down in the deep valley where mist were still rising to the sun. It looked like acres that God didn't have time to finish with his great palette when he shaped the surface of the earth. But when he made the laws for his natural paintings to come with each season, he perfected his shades of soft green on these jutted hills for the month of June to contrast with the light blue wind and the deep, overturned bowl of blue sky. Are there any old houses on this place? Naomi Dean asked. Only one, I said. I'd like to see it. That's where we're going now, I said, as I lifted her over another fence. We are in the headwaters of W Hollow now. We walked slowly down the path, hand in hand, while the wild birds flitted from tree to tree above us, singing their songs of spring. They had nests hidden in the leafy trees, and they were carrying worms and insects to their young. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of leaves above us again, and the waters of W Branch looked like a white ribbon winding peacefully under the tall trees. Soon we came to the broader valley below, where there were meadows and fields of young corn. This is the prettiest of all the valleys I've seen, Naomi Dean exclaimed as she stood facing the June wind that blew up the valley from the corn and hay fields. Where is the house from here? Just beyond that little point yonder, I explained, pointing toward the spot. The house stands where Shingle Mill Hollow comes into this valley. When we walked a short distance down to the valley, Naomi Dean stood before the old house where we had kept hay, corn, and cows all winter. It was a house my father had rented and we had lived in when I was a child. This house is over 100 years old, I said. But it's beautiful, Naomi Dean replied. Look at those broad logs. Let's go inside and see how it looks. When we went inside, where hay was still heaped in a corner of the big living room, Naomi Dean stopped suddenly to admire the big beams directly overhead, the stone fireplace, and the little stairway. This house could be fixed up, she said. But look over on this side, I said, pointing to the lean-to where 4 cows had spent the winter. That could all be cleared away, she said. Look at the well over there with a sweep. Look at these old flagstone walks and the hollyhocks still around this house. What do you plan to do with it? Tear it down, I said. Oh, no, she answered quickly. This is the place to live on this farm, she said, spreading our picnic lunch on an old table in the backyard. Not any modern conveniences here, I said, taking a bite of home-baked ham. 4 months out of the year, one has to ride horseback or walk to Landsboro. That doesn't matter, she laughed, pouring coffee from a thermos into 2 red cups. 2 generations of your people before you lived in this valley. You grew up here, Jesse. This is your valley. Would you like to live here? Yes, she answered firmly. On the night of October 12th, Naomi Dean and I started to Auckland to see a movie. I had just sold a poem, Eternal Destiny, to the American Mercury, for which I received $35. I had something more to say to Naomi Dean. "Let's forget the movie tonight," I said, just before we reached Auckland. "Why have you changed your mind, Jesse?" she said. "Look at the autumn leaves on the highway," I said. "Another year has passed. You're 31 and I'm 32. Let's get married tonight." "We've talked about getting married next spring," she reminded me. "We've been having dates for 17 years, I said. "Let's not wait until spring. I'm not teaching anymore. My lambs made a substantial payment on my land. I'm in the sheep business now, and I've about finished my first novel." "But I'm teaching school, Jesse," Naomi Dean said. "I've signed a contract with the Lansboro City Board of Education to teach this year. I won't break that contract." "Don't break it, but let's get married tonight." "If we get married," she said, "we'll have to keep it a secret. I can't let my people—" "That's all right," I interrupted her. After we got our marriage license, it was past 12 midnight, and the new day was Friday, October 13th. After waiting all these years to get married, we were superstitious about this date. We drove back to Lansboro with our marriage license. The following evening, I had another date with Naomi Dean. Before midnight, we had made all the arrangements for our marriage. With two couples, our closest friends, as witnesses, we were secretly married a few minutes past midnight on the morning of October 14th. Then we drove back to Lansboro, where she went to her home and I went to mine. I worked to finish my novel while she continued to teach her 10th and last year in the Lansboro City Schools. Then her dream of remodeling the old log house became a reality. And that's the end of the book. I'm going to read you this last little page, though, about Jesse. After working his way through Lincoln Memorial and Vanderbilt universities, Jesse Stuart taught school in his native Kentucky, where he later became a high school principal and county superintendent of schools. He lectured at various colleges and universities until 1954, when he suffered a near-fatal heart attack. After his recovery, he returned to writing, lecturing, and farming. As a specialist for the U.S. Department of State, Stuart traveled around the world, and he served as a visiting lecturer and professor at the American University in Cairo in 1960 through 61. His work includes nearly 30 books, ranging from poetry to biography, autobiography, novels, and short stories. Jesse Stuart died in 1984. What a great book this has been. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Sad to see it come to an end. Really fascinating life that Jesse led, and I think about how long he's been gone. 1984, I was 14 years old. So when I was 14 years old, I already loved to read. I was already an avid reader, but I wasn't quite as aware of Appalachia or that it was different than any other part of the country. I hadn't realized that yet. I did love to read, but I like thinking about that I was 14 when he died, and who, I don't know, would that please him all these years later? Here I am reading his book and really enjoying it. Something to think about. At the very beginning of this part we read today, he's walking to Naomi's house, and he's got a lot to tell her, he says. Well, obviously, then as the book goes on, we realize he's bought the sheep, he bought the land, him and his daddy and his uncle built the fence. He's done all that stuff without telling her. And it's so different in those days, of course, communication, even different from then to when I was a girl and you could pick up the telephone. But especially compared to today, people that are dating, usually they're constantly texting each other and talking on the phone, of course, seeing each other. It's easier to travel these days than it was in those days. So I think he was wanting to surprise her, but I think part of it probably was just that he had been in Ohio and she had still been there, and they just didn't see each other every weekend. That wasn't the relationship they had at that time. They had seen each other in the past. Like he goes on to say, they'd been dating for 17 years. So interesting that he had done all that without telling her. he probably, part of it was just the lack of communication, and then that he did want to surprise her. And he probably knew that she might say, "Are you sure, Jesse? Are you sure this is what you want to do? You know, are you really sure?" And then when he does tell her, you may have felt like that. The first time I read it, I felt like that too. I was like, sheep? Like she said, sheep? Where did this come from? You know, because of course all we know about the book is what Jesse's telling us about his life. If you remember, though, he did grow up on the farm with his dad and his, family. And then you remember that very first school he went to, how he knew how to milk cows, so then he got to stay in a better place. So he's definitely been, like the farming's been part of who he is his whole life. So it's just that we hadn't heard anything about sheep. And you can understand, the last few chapters there that we read about him being in Ohio, he was still, frustrated, even though he was at a really good school and he was making more money than he had ever made before. It still wasn't enough when you compared it to what people was making in the industries that were going on after the war, during the war, and I'm sure after the war too had ended. But so you can see his mind's kind of already going that way. Now he did, even though he was a farmer, sheep, he says that, gives that one little bit of information there right before they get married, is that he's already sold his first lambs and he got a good chunk of money that he could pay on his debt that he owed. But even after that, we know from that little biography, little part of at the end of the book, after the book ended, really, that's there, he did go on teaching. He still was a teacher. He went to Cairo and he taught there. Seems like I've seen an interview or something where he talks about that and talks about teaching English over there. But and then he definitely went on to write more books. If you search for Jesse Stuart, you can find some of his other books. I've read them. I've enjoyed all of them that I've read. More fiction books, not about his life. But so he did continue to teach, just not in the ways that he had thought he would spend the rest of his life. And then when him and Naomi go to the land he's bought, oh my goodness, that wonderful, beautiful, descriptive language that he uses to talk about the wildflowers and the trees and the valley and the sheep themselves, and just so beautiful, so beautiful. You could just see it and see him walking along there, and I'm sure she's like, looking at every little thing. And I really love that image, though, of them going in the old house. She's excited about it, and they've actually been keeping animals in it, plus they've got the hay and everything, but she sees beyond all that and says, this could be fixed up. So she's already kind of dreaming, could this work out? Could this... I'm sure after 17 years she knew Jesse was the man for her, but she's probably just thinking about could we make this work? Could we make a living here? Now you may wonder, why did they have to keep it secret that they got married? If you remember way back in the book, at one point he talks about that teachers, and this was more in the trustee thing, but he mentions that at some point. Some of you probably remember better than I do, but about how that you couldn't, you'd have to tell them if you was going to get married after you had become a teacher, after they had accepted you, then you couldn't all of a sudden decide to get married. Maybe that was something about his sister. Did she keep that secret? I can't remember if she got married and didn't tell nobody, but that's come up earlier in the book too. So I'm sure that was the reason of keeping it secret, is because she had already took that position, and like she said, she wasn't going to break the contract. She could have done that, but she wasn't going to do that. She was going to teach out that year, so that's why they would have had to have kept it secret because of that. So I hope you enjoyed this book as much as I did. I really enjoyed rereading it again, and Jesse was a real character. And then, of course, he ran into all kinds of characters that we've read about. He really had a passion for teaching and for trying to help his people there in Kentucky and in Ohio, and I'm sure in all the other places he went, even Cairo. He really had a passion for helping people learn and try to better themselves. I really liked that. I also liked this part when he was talking about I was going to mention this, and I just thought of it. When he mentioned the part about he kind of is talking about God creating that beautiful, the land that they're seeing, and he says it's almost like maybe he quit with his palate before he continued, but then all you had to do was see that wonderful everything they're seeing, and then see it against the June sky. He's talking about that. I've thought about that so many times in my area of Appalachia. There's just certain times of whether it's in early spring with that fresh green, or if it's the fall, the bright colors of fall. They put on their fall garments, I say. You see that against the sky. It is just stark. Even I've lived here so many years, my whole life. I've seen it every year of my life. And there's sometimes that I see that starkness of the mountains against the sky, whether it's in early spring or the lushness of summer or the fall or even the barrenness of winter. And I'm just shocked. It's just like awe-inspiring, shocked. And of course, as a believer, I know that God created those beautiful views like Jesse's talking about. Reminds me of, there's a song, a gospel song, God's Coloring Book. And definitely, I think that's what Jesse was feeling on that part. I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what you enjoyed about this part of the book. And I hope you'll drop back by next Friday. I haven't decided yet. I've decided kind of the book I want to read next, but I may read some Christmas stuff in between that. So be sure to drop back by, though, next Friday, and I'll be reading something.